one of the family artists that if it was be okay if he came in and gave a demonstration on ceramics on the wheel. This is my brother Michael Burgraff. Well, so here's how it works. There's 7 kids in my family. He is the second to the oldest, and I'm the second to the youngest. There's almost 10 years in between those two. So I was very happy when the PTO had agreed to say, yeah, sure, you know what, first day back, this would be a great opportunity for you guys to relax a little bit more, get together, and see some pottery being made. And so here's what I wanted to tell you about. Last night, we went down into my basement, into my studio, and he brought his own potter's wheel. These are ours for intermediate and middle school. I have another one as well. Here we were down in my basement, and we were throwing pottery. And the place where we get our clay from, Continental Clay, they gave us some extra boxes because they know we do charity work as well. So we sat down there and threw almost 50 bowls. And they're soup bowls and or whatever you want to put in your bowl, cereal or dog food or whatever. The funny thing was we both went to the same university. We grew up in Superior, Wisconsin, and we went on to UW Superior. It's cold up there, just FYI. So we learned from the same professor. His name was Professor Grittner. And Mr. Grittner was a very finite kind of person. There's only one real way to do it, and it was his way, which we found out later that's so absolutely untrue, but he was able to introduce us to this. And from that, we were able to take and make it into our own. So last night, I am over on mine, I'm looking over at his, and he's doing some weird things with his fingers, and I'm like, what was that? What are you doing? And he's like, well, that's how I put my dimples. And I'm like, well, no, you're supposed to do it this way. He's looking at me like, how did you do that? So after learning it one way, we took and we made it into our own, which is what defines us, what makes us all special, what makes us all great. I believe in lifelong learning. You learn something and you're able to do it forever. You know, right now, taking your bike out is going to be kind of one of those, ooh, boy, I definitely got to wear a helmet because I'm going to hit an ice patch. As we know, there's ice out there. And, but if you wait, come May, it's nice out, you're going to look at that bike and you're going to think just for a second, yeah, I better be really careful when I start out. Do I have my balance correct? Am I going to be able to do that? So a couple blocks down the street, oh, hey, I remember how to do this. I can do this. By third, fourth block, you're like, oh yeah, all summer long I'm going to be doing this. You learned it correctly. You're a lifelong learner. You can always get on that bike and you can always keep pedaling it. You're never not going to be able to do it. So when you have things like this, or like in sports or in other classes, math, science, tech ed, phi ed, all these, typing, music, when you learn those skills, Spanish. When you learn those skills, they stick with you. Now, not that you have to use them every day, and I don't. It took my brother to come to my house for me to break out my wheel. I think I did it 2 or 3 times over the summer. And I hadn't thrown nearly that many. So by the time we got through our first 25, I'm like, really? We're going to keep doing this? It's like, it's not for us. It's for a charity. I'm like, all right.
I'm only good for 3 more.
Yeah. So we did that, and what we're going to do is we're going to try to get you interested in find what you're good at, even if you're not good in art, or think you're not good in art, or maybe you love art and you excel at it, or you're just one of those, yeah, I can do it, but I'm not, I'm just kind of hinging. There's things in your life that you are passionate about. My definition of art is taking something that is difficult and making it look easy. And if I'll put somebody up here and I'll ask them to do it, and you're gonna see how frustrated they get. And you should never get frustrated. That's probably not a good thing for me to do. You should be having fun with it. So, how many people bake? Baked a couple of cookies or cupcakes in your lifetime? All right, so who did you learn from? All right, so the thing is, here you were, and when they bake theirs, you're like, when can I get into those? And they're like, no, they're all mine. Or no, you can't wait until after dinner. You can't have those until later. They're so good. It's like, could you teach me how to do it? So they're going ahead and they're teaching you their skill. And the first time you crack an egg, half the egg goes inside, the eggshell goes in there, and you're like, ooh. Well, it's never an easy process when you're learning, but once you get good at it, you can make it an art form. You can make a lot of things in your life look easy if you practice hard enough. I was telling one of the classes earlier that I'm old enough that I was able to go see Michael Jordan in his prime. I had to go down to Chicago and I was watching the game and nobody could touch him. Nobody in the entire, who were they playing? They were playing like the Lakers or something. And they were a great team too. This guy just down the planks, gets to the top of the key like he was floating on air. Stick the tongue out, down. I'm like, oh, I gotta try that when I get home. Yeah. Well, I got maybe a couple feet under the basket, and I run up and I try to just touch it. Like, no, that's not right. But I did put up the basketball saying, I can never make it look as good as he can, so I'm not gonna do it. Practice, practice, practice makes permanent. You wanna learn how to do it, you wanna learn how to do it the right way. So that's how we've excelled at this. That's how we've been able to get to the point where we can take these little lumps of clay and make them look like that.
I had a friend who went over to China to study ceramics. He's back now and is an incredible ceramicist. When he was over there studying with some of their masters, he went over pretty, I'm really good at this. I've been a ceramics guy for a long time. First thing they told him to do was make 1,000 teacups. And he said, why? He said, because that's how we do it. Muscle memory, knowing that you can do it. It took him 2 weeks before he could throw his first non-teacup. It took him 2 weeks to throw 1,000 teacups. But after that, he said, I understand why they made me do that. I can do teacups in my sleeve, and because of the shape, I can throw so many more things that I didn't know that I could.
So for a lot of you need to remember this in this class because it's only helpful for later in the year or later in life. The type we have here is called earthenware. Now, you guys remember where clay comes from, right? Ancient rivers and streams, and so at one point the glacier was here, and there could have been a half a mile of ice right where we're sitting. And it receded, and it dug out all the lakes and valleys and streams, and even the Great Lakes. And as it did, it crushed the rocks. It ground the rocks down, and they became deposited in different spots, usually along rivers and the lake sides. And the clay, which was heavier than the water, would deposit itself and be there. Well, now we can go back a million years later, 100,000 years later, and we can go dig this stuff up. where we came from, Superior, Miss Bourget as well, I gotta keep throwing that out. We're proud to be Superiorites.
Yay.
Go Spartans. Here, as it receded towards the lake, where Lake Superior is right now, it created a huge mass of clay. So when I was playing G.I. Joes when I was your age, I was in the backyard taking my shovel and digging out a trench, and if I went down too deep, more than 10 inches, I ran into clay, which was fun, but my mom had a policy of, you don't get to play around clay. She hated clay when it got into clothes because it wouldn't come out, because it's also called the Iron Range, and there's a lot of iron in the rock up in that area. All the clay there is orange, like rust on a car, because iron is used to make steel, and they mine it up there and they send it to the steel plants around the world, and when a car rusts out, it turns out to be looking like Nora's hair. Here we have a white earthenware, and white earthenware is the most commonly found clay in nature, and it's a raw material used to make most of the pottery in the world. It's easy to use, that's why we use it. Somebody goes out with a steam shovel, a bulldozer, and whatever, finding this area of clay. Now there's clay around here, because of course the glacier was here, but it's only in little spots, and it's whiter clay. What you find around here is usually just a small little, like a bend on the river, and clay can be mined out. It's not infinite for certain kinds. So when a ceramicist, like my brother, who only uses stoneware, finds the kind he likes, they stick with it. And if they know that the clay is coming to an end, they'll buy up as much as they can so that they know they're gonna have it during their lifetime. He likes stoneware, and that's a clay name because when it's fired, it has different characteristics of stone. It's more like going back to stone. And it has a surface in it that has more grog and more sand. So as you're throwing it, you can feel little particles, and it's not as pliable. So last night when we were on the wheel, I watched him try his first one.
Oh, I could do this. La 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 la, flop flop flop.
He was so used to the walls being able to stand up on their own, and he kept adding the water. I'm like, this ought to be interesting.
He looks at me and goes, that looks kind of thin.
So I knew the properties of this clay very well. So I was able to keep going and keep throwing. And he, being as good as he is, was able to figure out quickly how to do it. Now normally with his clay, he wouldn't have nearly as much slip as you see. Slip is just clay suspended in water. So if you go up to Superior again and you look as you're driving in, right before the Quick Trip, there's a river that runs underneath the bridge. It's called the Namaji River, and everybody goes up there and goes, oh, that's such a dingy, stinky, icky river. Look how polluted it is. It's not. There's a lot of fish that live in that river. I've fished it. It's because it has clay banks. And as the water comes across, it creates this stuff. So if there's a big storm up in Superior, it'll push all that red out into the bay and pass into the actual lake. And, you know, people are like, ooh, I don't think I want to, well, first people go, holy, it's so cold, I don't want to get in there anyways. But the people that do like to get in it, they're like, oh, it's so dirty, I don't want to get in. It's just clay that's being suspended in it. Now, we have lakes around here that, and I like swimming. I can swim in just about anything. We get there and I'm like, that's green. That's some really green stuff. I think I'm gonna just hang out over by the picnic table today and have an extra brat. The final kind of clay that we're talking about is porcelain. Porcelain is the kind it's strong, it's very white, and it takes on shapes very, very nicely. Similar to the earthenware. How many people have used porcelain today?
My hand is up.
Okay, Well, how many people have gone to the bathroom today? Okay, if you have used the bathroom and hopefully flushed or washed your hands, that's white porcelain. It's made to be strong. If you drop something into your sink, it's meant to withstand it and not break right away. Okay? It's meant so that if somebody's standing on the toilet, it doesn't crush underneath them, which you shouldn't do. Porcelain is the other type. Now, clay comes in a lot of different colors. Like I said, red clay is where you find iron ore. There's green clay, there's bluish gray, and white earthenware. Now, like I told you earlier, my mom hated washing out red clay, so I had to promise her that I wouldn't go play down by the river and that I would stay away from it as much as I could. So when I came home after playing with my buddies and I had red clay shoes and my jeans, the knees were soaked through with red clay, and she's like, gee, how was the park today? I'm like, oh, just fine. I wasn't anywhere I wasn't supposed to be. Right. She knew right away. Also, one year they were taking and opening up the street in front of our house to put new sewers in. If you know any other properties of red clay, it likes to move and crush things as it does that. You can't find hardly a single fence in Superior that isn't at one way, shape, or point moved even past the frost line. It doesn't do good with things buried under the ground. So they were going to replace the sewers in right outside of our house, and for weeks they had the bulldozers and the big diggers and the dump trucks pulling out all this clay, and the pipes were big enough for you guys to just kind of walk through like this. They're big pieces of concrete pipe. Well, I decided, bad idea, to go play on a bulldozer. Like, it rained for like a week straight, and the whole street was nothing but a big pool, a red pool. And the guys that were in the construction were like, no, we can't do anything until it dries up. And it doesn't dry up like it does around here. We have sand and we have soil that will help the water soak through. Here, it just sits like it's in a cup. And I was up there and I was with some friends and we were playing around and I fell in, and it wasn't like I'm swimming in the swimming pool. And I couldn't get out. I was in the water, and as I came up to the bank, because these were newly dug, I would pull and it would just slide underneath me. And it would slide underneath me. It was like being stuck in quicksand. And fortunately, my friends they went and grabbed a stick and they helped me pull out of there. Again, here I am covered, not now, just my knees and my shoes, top to bottom red clay. I looked like I just came out as a monster of red clay. So trying to not get in trouble yet again,
He was really good at it.
I learned from the best.
We didn't get caught.
Yeah, by the time I came around, Mom knew all the good tricks. So here, I went around the house to the hose, and the water's still not warm coming out of the hose. I sat and hosed down, and warm water is really the only way to get clay out well, and stood underneath that hose until I got most of it off of my face and hands, and then I stripped down. I know, I wasn't gonna get caught, and I threw them away, threw all my clothes away, which were actually his clothes, because I had a lot of hand-me-downs, being the second to the youngest out of 7. I didn't want them anyways. So then, went inside, tried to find another pair of clean jeans and another t-shirt, and of course my mom
would never suspect him coming in his underwear that he had done something.
Yeah. Busted again. Which is why, one of the reasons why you'll never see red clay in my classroom. That's one of those too many bad memories of it.
I did not know his aversion to red clay. 2 years ago, I brought the clay I like here. And all I heard all day was, oh, that red clay. Oh, that stuff. Never get it off. It's like liner baby all over again.
When I was teaching kindergarten and first grade, we'd make a project with clay, a little pinch pot, and they'd be like, oh, I can't wait to bring this home tonight. Oh, I'm gonna give it to my grandma because she's coming over. It's like, no, you can't. You gotta slow down here a little bit. You've got a process, and the process takes normally no less than 2 weeks from start to finish. Now next year, as sixth graders, you guys are going to get art for one more year before you have to choose if you want art. And 7th and 8th grade, you get to choose if you want to have drawing and painting or ceramics and sculpture. Both of them are fantastic, let me tell you. So just saying. So to get your clay from here in your hands, or actually in the ground, where you're taking it out of the ground, it's in plastic form when you get it and you mold it into something, whether it's a statue, a pinch pot, a coil pot, a slab pot, or a piece of pottery. That's when it's the most fun. You guys get to make it into what you want. Then we go into what's called a leather hard stage. That's the next stage where you get it a little bit harder. You don't want to push too hard because it'll break, but it's still wet enough that you can take and carve into the clay. You want to do that because if it's in the plastic stage, which you're used to having to do because we don't have the time to go into the leather hard, if you do it in the plastic, if you write your name on the side of the piece, it's going to bend it, it's going to warp it because of the pressure you're putting on it. When it's in a leather hard state, it's going to hold its form. So I always say it's like taking a tennis shoe and wiggling the tongue. That's a plastic state. But if you have somebody next to you that has leather shoes and you go to do it and it's like over here, it doesn't want to bend, but it will bend a little bit. That's the leather hard state.
Everybody stick out your tongue and grab it. That's like nothing other than me having you stick out your tongue and grab it.
I can't.
Simon says, quit sticking your tongue out at me.
Good job.
Now we're in a bone dry. We have to go into a third stage. And this is about a week into the clay just sitting on a shelf. When it gets into the bone dry, that's when I'm able to go ahead and start looking at whether or not I'm going to put it into the kiln, because the kiln will not accept any water. If I have even one molecule of water, when my oven kiln gets to 600 degrees, the water flash boils and evaporates and pops out of the clay like a piece of popcorn. And the only bad part about it is, usually all these pieces are stuck together. Hello, Miss Watt. Happy New Year. The pieces are so close together that something else is going to break, like a firecracker. Woo! All right. He's trying to wedge on a bat. That's that blue thing. The bat, the components here, the wheel is a centrifugal force machine that spins in one direction. The bat goes on top of the wheel. The pedal controls the wheel and the bat. You have to center the clay to make it work correctly. And he's going to show you that in a minute. The bigger the piece of clay, though, the harder it is. So I'd like to have a show of hands. How many people think that even though he's not good with this clay, he's still going to make something out of it? Wow, you guys are better. You're more confident than I am. Okay, so say something happens up to the point where it's bone dry. I can throw it back in a bucket, put water on it, and get it back to being a consistency of wet plastic clay. If I fire it though, it then becomes ceramic. It's not going back to being a rock, but it's like a rock. If you then drop it, you're going to end up finding that there's two things that are going to happen. You're either going to have to invest in some good glue, or you're going to have to throw it away, and maybe there'll be another glacier that comes through in a million years and turns it back into clay. It's called bisqueware, like biscuits, bisqueware, after it comes out of the kiln the first time. And everybody's like, ooh, I get to get mine back. How many people received their gnome and took it home already? Just one class. All right, well, we had to rush through that so you guys could get it. You guys painted yours, which is one of the options. The other option would have been to do a glaze. A glaze is a liquid glass that goes over the top of your bisqueware and will then make it shiny. Usually about 3 layers makes a good glaze. Pretty simple. You drop it in the oven, 350 for 15 minutes, you got yourself a nice snack or meal. His is more like Papa Murphy's. So you put his in there, 425 for 25 to 30 minutes, and you still got to check to see if it's done. What would happen if we were to take and reverse the two pizzas and temperatures? Right, the bigger one would not get even close to the crust rising. But the other one would burn up completely. Well, throughout the years of teaching, I've had that accident happen a couple of times where I hit the wrong number setting the kiln, and I came back to find that all of the pieces, because I cooked it too high, melted into little blobs that looked like lava that just hardened. And I've also done the opposite, where you find I didn't cook it long enough and it stays brittle. It doesn't cook the way it should. Now, for glazes, there's several different kinds. Here's one. And remember when I told you guys about neutral colors? Browns and grays, they go with everything, blacks and whites. So this is a solid color glaze. It's all one color, through and through. Is this it yet?
Those are 4. Okay. Paint. Brush that off.
This one, you can see the bottom up to the top is one color glaze. It's kind of a blondish color. And then you have a drip glaze coming down. This one worries me, always, because you never know how different glazes are going to react to one another. And I have had them where the drip glaze doesn't stick to the other glaze and it just runs right off and puddles underneath on the shelf. And then you have to take it out with a hammer. They're iridescent and opaque and all kinds of other types of glazes. You can see that this one has multiple colors within it. Now when I look at glazes, I look to make sure that there is no lead content in the glazes. That way it makes them microwave safe, dinner safe, and dishwasher safe. And by the way, after I had 30 of my closest family over the last week, we now no longer have a dishwasher that works.
Oh.
Don't know why. Toilets still do. All right, so in the bottom, you can see this beautiful, see how shiny that is? So what he has here, close, you said glitter, but this is actually glass itself. Sorry. He broke up a blue bottle and put the chips of the bottle in here. So what happened was the kiln got warm enough to melt the glass and the glaze, but not warm enough to do anything to the hole itself. So there's quite a bit of science. You don't have to be a scientific mind to do this. In fact, one of the boys last class asked my brother, "Hey, did you ever play any sports? Because it looks like, you know, there's a line where you can either be artistic or you can be sporty." I grew up watching him play basketball and football and wrestle. Myself, I played baseball and did some track and some football, a little bit of football. And, you know, if there's a pool, pond, river, stream where our whole family is, we're there. We're going to be floating down it. We're going to be splashing in it. We're going to be up to our neck in the water. Now, this glaze here is, you see how he dimpled it with his thumb? He put thumbprints all over it, so it has this like jeweled on the outside. This is called the Raku fire glaze. Now, Raku is a completely different. This is God. That's out of the picture. This was fired in a garbage can with a propane torch, heating it up with pieces of sawdust burning around it. So what he did was, first he made it into he had to center it. And when you center something, it's not easy, because if you push it on one side, it goes over that way, and then you try to push it back the other way, and it just kind of does this to you. And there's certain techniques. Now, I have a certain way of doing it, and I've been pretty successful with my students, but if they still have trouble doing it, then it's one of those, why don't you go ask Ms. Youngberg, the high school art teacher, and she can show you her technique, because she's got a different way of doing it. If they still can't get it, then I say, you know what would be best? Go on to YouTube and find a tutorial. And that's what I did with my washing machine. I got water coming out of the bottom of it. So I stop it and go on YouTube, and I was like, gee, is there an easy way? Did I do something wrong here? What can I do to get it fixed? I did what I could, but the repairman's on his way. What he's got going on here, he made it probably look simple because he's an artist and he made it into an art form. Next, he had put a hole down the center of it, and then he widened it out. What we have here is where people took and cut the different stages in half, just to show you where the fingers would be and where the hole inside. Then once you get it to where you want it, at the bottom as thick as you need it, and the walls thicker, you start at the bottom like one of those crane machines. You pay the dollar and it goes out and gets you a 20-cent ball or a 30-cent fuzzy animal. Yeah. So the claw comes over and it goes down, and as it does, it grabs onto it, and then it pulls it up. And just like that crane machine, when it gets to a certain point, it lets go. So as he's coming up the wall here, when he gets closer to the top, he backs off. Now he's making a cylinder, and that was what one of our professor made sure that we knew how to do cylinder first, because once you get the cylinder the height you want it, that's when you can start to make like that first vase, the genie vase that he made. That's when you get to make the piece, the shape you want it. You make the cylinder and then you can make the shape. So like his teacup episode, we, as first-time ceramicists in my professor's class, our first project was we had to make a set of 6 cylinders that had to be 4 inches wide and 8 inches tall. And he went through and he looked at them, he grabbed the garbage can, and he went, nope, 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 nope. He didn't think any of us could do it, and he was right. We all had them lopsided, too thick, too thin. So we went back and we had to start that whole project over, but what we did was we learned how to perfect that. Because practice doesn't always make perfect, it makes permanent. If you are practicing it the wrong way, you're going to do it the wrong way always. He wanted us to make it the right way. So now he's going up, he's doing he's pulling it up as he does. He's trying to keep it in a cylinder shape. Yeah, that's something.
Thanks for those chicken nuggets.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
We ran a quick trip for lunch.
They got chicken nuggets.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so the question was, they didn't always have a Continental or Minnesota clay shop to go buy it. What you need to do though is you have to refine it. So there was quite a process because we've always wondered that. We just took a shovel and went up to our old house and, well, somebody else's house now, and dug a hole in the backyard, brought home some red clay. We would have to find out at what point does that clay stay fast and at what point does it fall into a pile. So, as Mr. Emerson asked, yes, there's a long way of finding that out. And the kiln process was never exactly as easy as it was today, where you just hit the buttons in the correct sequence and walk away and come back. Older kilns were always pits in the ground where they would take and they would actually burn horse and cow manure. Of course it stunk. Yes, I know what you're thinking. But it's like hotter than charcoal. But I would not put any hot dogs over that. Okay? So they would put all this dried dung into the pit, put their pieces carefully into it, put straw over the top of it, and then take pieces of broken pottery and make a lid for it. And then they would light it, it would get really hot, and as it burned down, the heat was trapped by the ceramic on top of it, and a day later, 2 days later, they would go out and take the pieces out and hope that they had the pottery that they had put in there. Looking good, bro.
They still have great big, if you would go to school in St. Cloud, the university there has a great big wood fire kiln that they fire up just twice a year. And they sit with it almost a week and keep feeding it logs. And they throw their stuff and then they just pile it in and pile it in and pile it in. And it is always a roll of the dice to see what comes out of it, where in the kiln it was, how hot were different things. And it really is pretty fun.
Yeah, you're never guaranteed. In fact, my first 10 years of teaching, I think I could guarantee 1 in 8 kids, or no, not 1 in 8 kids would lose a piece because I wasn't confident with the way the process worked. I would let them get it too thick on the bottom or whatever, and 1 in 8 kids' piece would pop on them. But I've got it much better now. So. machine called a wheel because it has a wheel on it. This is a bat. So when the commissioner puts the bat signal up, I just throw this up in the air. That one.
I was going to say all three of them.
Pedal down here. Pedals right here, similar to a car. If I push it all the way down, it goes as fast as it can. If I just give it a little tap, it's not going to go very fast. Fast, slow, medium.
And why?
Because you start with the centrifugal force, centering it as fast as you can. Okay, once you get it going as fast as you can, it's easier to get it to stay in the center. Now, when I went to school, or when we went to school, kind of in the middle, Arnold Schwarzenegger went to UW Superior. Does anybody know who he is?
No.
He's been in a million movies. Okay. Kindergarten Cop.
Oh, get in the chopper.
Terminator.
Yeah. Get in the chopper.
Yep. All right, so this guy started his career coming over to the United States from Austria as a bodybuilder. His job was to go into the gym and put muscles on his muscles. That's it, and he won Mr. Universe multiple times. So this guy was the epitome of muscles in the world. And he went to UW Superior so he could get a degree and pursue other interests in his life.
Like becoming governor of California.
Like becoming governor of California, along with his plethora of movies that he's made. So he did really good at his FIAD classes. He could go in and lift more than anybody. He was run, he was nimble, he could run, he did everything like that. His math, science, the reading scores were really good. He had that going on. He needed some help with the reading because, again, he was from Austria, but he just didn't have the American the background because he was making so many movies. So he had to take a liberal arts class. Well, he could do music, he could play an instrument, he could do theater, which he was already good at.
Oh no, just as a piece of this, Arnold, this is more for the adults here. We were one of the first universities to offer credit for life experience, which is part of the reason that he came over and did so well in athletics. He did apply for credits for acting in the theater department. And the theater department told him no, he would get 0. And he said, haven't you seen my movies? And they said, yes, and that's why. But he did go, he was downstairs in the ceramic studio trying to get his Easy A ceramics because you just throw the clay where you want it to go.
Big man, little ball of clay. I mean, this was probably part of his tricep. So here he was, sitting where she's sitting. See what she just did? She centered it. This guy put his ball of clay on the wheel and he started pushing and he started pulling and his muscles were just, I got this little ball of clay is not going to do anything. Beat him. That little ball of clay bested the most muscular
Mr. Universe.
Mr. Universe. So at the same time, a gal of your size who came over, sat down on the wheel next to him, went, boop. Oh, look at that, it's perfect. He walked out. He wasn't going to have any more of that. He flunked the class and almost didn't get his degree. So to this day, every year, every graduating class from UW Superior asks if he would come in and be the guest speaker at their graduation, and he refuses outright. So, little history. All right,
Part of that is because on interviews he says he's from the University of Wisconsin.
yeah.
And so everyone assumes that it's Madison. I think that's enough. I once had a really good art teacher tell me that if you're painting or doing art, that as an artist, when you think you're 85% done, you should be done. Because as artists, we all want it perfect. And so we push it a little bit more and push it a little bit more, and all of a sudden it falls or it breaks or we've added too much color to it. So when Mr. B said 85%, I'm going to be done with this pot. The ceramics teacher, I still go out to M State, which is a 2-year college right in Fergus Falls. They have a really nice ceramics studio. And Lori, who owns her own ceramics store, lets me come in and throw with the students because they're very inspirational. She would probably tell me to do one more pull. But like Mr. B said in the beginning, I'm not fond of this clay. It's new clay to me. So unlike last night where I made it full, I'm going to be done with this one. It may be a little thick. I'll get a